There are people who fear uncertainty so deeply that they begin trying to organize every part of life. Not because they enjoy control, because somewhere inside them, control feels safer than disappointment. Your soulmate has lived that way for much longer than they ever realized. They planned every decision. They thought through every possibility. They imagined every outcome before taking even the smallest emotional step. From the outside, it looked like wisdom. Inside, it often felt like quiet exhaustion. Because the heart was never created to live inside endless calculations. It was created to experience. This message is for the soul who has been wondering whether someone connected to your journey is finally learning that love cannot be managed like a schedule. Something unexpected has begun happening within them. It started with a simple moment. One afternoon, they missed a train they had carefully planned to catch. Normally, they would have been frustrated. Instead, they sat on a nearby bench and watched people come and go. Children laughed without worrying about tomorrow. An elderly couple smiled at one another without speaking. A young musician played for strangers, who paused only for a few seconds, before continuing on their way. Life was moving beautifully, without asking anyone's permission. That ordinary moment planted an extraordinary thought. What if I have been trying to control things that were never meant to be controlled? The question followed them home. It stayed with them during dinner. It returned before they fell asleep. And over the next several days, they began noticing how often fear disguised itself as preparation. Every time they imagined the worst before allowing themselves to hope, fear called it being realistic. Every time they avoided emotional closeness because nothing was guaranteed, fear called it being careful. Every time they delayed saying what truly mattered, fear convinced them they were simply waiting for better timing. Slowly, they realized that many of the decisions they believed were logical had actually been guided by the desire to avoid uncertainty. Yet uncertainty had never disappeared. It had only delayed the experiences their heart longed for. This realization encouraged them to revisit moments from their past. Not to criticize themselves, to understand themselves. They remembered opportunities they never accepted because they waited until they felt completely ready. They remembered conversations they postponed until the perfect words never came. They remembered connections that quietly faded because they believed there would always be more time. Among those memories, one connection continued standing apart. Yours. They couldn't explain why. It wasn't because everything had been perfect. It wasn't because there had never been challenges. It was because whenever they thought about you, they remembered how peaceful they felt. Whenever they stopped trying to control every moment, there had been space to laugh, space to be quiet, space to simply exist without constantly wondering what came next. Looking back, they recognized how rare that feeling truly was. Instead of making them anxious, your presence often reminded them to breathe. At the time, they overlooked how valuable that was. Now they understand. Peace is not ordinary. It is one of the greatest gifts any meaningful connection can offer. That awareness began changing the way they approached every part of life. Rather than forcing immediate answers, they started allowing questions to remain unanswered for a while. Instead of rushing to solve every emotional puzzle, they became willing to sit patiently with their feelings. To their surprise, clarity arrived more easily that way, not because they chased it, because they stopped chasing. For the first time in years, they discovered that some answers arrive only after the mind becomes quiet enough to hear the heart. That lesson became impossible to ignore. Every day they practiced releasing just a little more control, a little less overthinking, a little less predicting, a little more trust, a little more presence. Without realizing it, they were becoming someone who no longer believed that safety came from controlling every outcome. They were beginning to believe that real strength comes from remaining open even when life offers no guarantees. And perhaps that quiet change is already preparing them to understand your connection in a way they never could before. As the days continued passing, your soulmate noticed something remarkable. The more they released the need to control everything, the lighter their heart began to feel. For years, they had carried invisible pressure to make the perfect choice, Pressure to avoid mistakes, pressure to predict every possible outcome before allowing themselves to move forward. Now they were discovering that much of that pressure had never protected them. It had only prevented them from fully experiencing life. This realization arrived through small moments, a conversation that flowed naturally because they stopped rehearsing every word beforehand, a spontaneous decision that created a beautiful memory, an unexpected opportunity they would have missed if they had waited for certainty. Each experience quietly taught the same lesson. Life often unfolds best when it is allowed room to breathe. The more they embraced this understanding, the more they began reflecting on their relationships. They noticed how often they had treated emotional connections like problems to solve rather than experiences to live. Whenever feelings became strong, they searched for explanations. Whenever uncertainty appeared, they searched for guarantees. Whenever vulnerability emerged, they searched for reasons to protect themselves. Looking back now, they realized how exhausting that had been. Love was never meant to feel like a constant negotiation with fear. It was meant to feel alive, present, authentic. That awareness brought them back to your connection once again, not because they were holding on to the past, because the connection represented something they were only now beginning to fully appreciate. Around you, there were moments when they forgot to control everything, moments when they laughed without analyzing, moments when they listened instead of preparing the next response, moments when they felt emotionally present rather than emotionally guarded. At the time, they thought those moments were ordinary. Now they understood how rare they truly were. Those memories carried a feeling they struggled to find elsewhere, a feeling of ease, a feeling of acceptance, a feeling that they did not need to constantly manage how they were perceived. As they reflected more deeply, another realization emerged. Perhaps one of the reasons the connection remained meaningful was because it showed them what life felt like when they weren't trying so hard to protect themselves. That thought touched them more than they expected, because it revealed how much energy they had spent building emotional defenses. Defenses against disappointment, defenses against rejection, defenses against uncertainty. Yet those same defenses had often kept joy at a distance as well. Now they were beginning to understand that courage is not the absence of fear. Courage is choosing openness even when fear is present. This lesson began influencing every area of their life. They became more comfortable admitting when they didn't have all the answers, more willing to trust the process instead of demanding immediate clarity, more patient with situations that required time rather than control. People around them noticed subtle changes. Their energy felt calmer. Their reactions felt softer. They no longer seemed trapped inside endless cycles of overthinking. Without realizing it, they were becoming more emotionally free. And emotional freedom changed the way they thought about love. They stopped asking, "How can I guarantee this will work?" Instead, they began asking, "How can I show up honestly for what I feel?" That single shift transformed everything. Because honesty requires presence, and presence requires trust. For the first time, they understood that meaningful relationships are not built by controlling every outcome. They are built by consistently choosing authenticity. As this awareness deepened, they also became more compassionate toward themselves. They stopped judging their past decisions so harshly. They recognized that the version of themselves who needed control was simply trying to feel safe. There was no reason for shame, only understanding, only growth, only gratitude for the lessons that journey had provided. And perhaps that gratitude is what allowed their heart to soften even more. They no longer viewed life as a series of risks to avoid. They began seeing it as a series of opportunities to experience, learn, and connect. That perspective naturally changed the way they viewed your connection. Instead of focusing on unanswered questions, they focused on what the connection had already given them. Greater self-awareness, greater emotional depth, a clearer understanding of the kind of love they truly desired. Most importantly, it taught them that genuine love cannot thrive inside constant fear. It flourishes where trust exists, trust in another person, trust in the timing of life, trust in their own ability to navigate whatever comes next. Perhaps that is the greatest transformation happening within them now. They are no longer trying to force life into a specific shape. They are allowing life to reveal itself one step at a time. And in doing so, they are discovering a peace that control could never provide. A peace that does not depend on certainty. A peace that remains steady even when the future is unknown. Maybe that is why their heart feels different now. Not because every question has been answered. Not because every path has become clear. But because they finally understand something that once seemed impossible. The most beautiful chapters of life are rarely planned in detail. They are lived with openness, with trust, with courage, and with a heart that is no longer afraid to embrace what it truly feels. Perhaps that quiet courage is becoming their greatest strength. And perhaps, without fully realizing it yet, it is guiding them toward a future where love is no longer something to control, but something to experience, cherish, and receive with an open heart.